Okie dokie. Your starter, in your green books, write the title, Technical Knowledge. And then I'd like you to create a bullet point list of all the tools, equipment, processes, materials, etc. that you can think of. You'll need to think right back to the very beginning of our project, the very, very beginning of our project. Bullet point list, write as many as you can, ready, steady, go. Okie dokie. So, lots of possible answers that you could have had for this. These are just some of mine. You may have more, you may have less. I won't read through all of them, or I might do, I'll see how I feel. But let me read through the first column. Since starting this clock project, this is what we've used. A pencil, a tri-square, a ruler, a mould, PVA glue, vice, and a G-clamp, or a clamp, as you might more commonly know it. However, these have all been split into group. Why do you think that is? Because they were all used at different stages of our making. So, I have 5 groups of materials and tools. I also have 5 names of the stages of making that we've used for our clock. The 5 stages are marking out, clock face manufacture, lamination, making the base, and final clock construction. With the people next to you, I would like you to write down each of those groups, so pencil, tri-square, ruler, plywood, then mould, PVA, glue, vice, G-clamp, flexi-ply. I want you to write them all down in their groups, and then above them I'd like you to state or name the stage of making you think they match up to. I'm going to give you a good 5 minutes to get all of that written down and those stages of make labelled as well. A good 5 minutes. Give it a go. So, answers are now on the screen. Check your work. Check your work. Have you got the correct stages of make with the correct groups? Take a minute. If you need to make any amendments, that's absolutely fine. The video can be paused here for you to do so. The next few slides are going to recap what we've done so far to actually make our clock. Some of these you might not have done yet, and that is absolutely fine. At least if you haven't done them, it gives you an idea of what we're going to do next. So the first stage was marking out, and that included the pencil, tri-square, ruler, and plywood. You had to mark out the void that you then chiseled out for the base. And if you can't remember, the void was that little rectangle you chiseled out for your lamination arm to sit nice and flush with the surface. The next one was actually making the base itself. So we've marked it out. This is where you use the mazzle? What was that? A mallet, a chisel, bench hook, and plywood. Now, if you can't remember this, think of me saying 1, 2, 3, hit, because that is what we did a lot of. So we did it in sequence first of all, and we used that technique to remove the layers so that our laminated arm fit flush in that void before we then glued our MDF top on top of the base, and that secured the arm in position. Next, the lamination. Now we may have done this first, not necessarily a complete order to this, but the lamination involved us using a mould, PVA glue, a lot of PVA glue, a vice or a G-clamp, and 2 pieces of flexi ply. So you weren't just given the arm that you've used for your clock, you've made it yourself by sandwiching the flexi ply and a nice layer of glue into the mould and then adding a lot of compression. So a lot of strength, a lot of pressure, and we left it there for a good few hours, and then I didn't give them back to you until the next practical, or even a practical after that, because it takes so much time to dry. Next stage is the manufacturing of the clock face. All that means is making your clock face, actually drawing it out and cutting it to the right size. So for that, we've used a pencil, a coping saw, a brace of paper or sandpaper, a vise, and some MDF. This was all about cutting out those awkward shapes. So you might remember a term called relief lines, perhaps. Now, some of us have only just started this, but it does take a lot of effort, especially when you're using that brace of paper to sand the edges to make a nice, neat, but also high quality edge to your product. And then finally, it's the final clock construction, which we haven't quite got that far yet. That involves a pillar drill, because you've got to drill the hole ready for the mechanism in both the arm and the clock face. It involves a lot of PVA glue, because you've got to stick it all together, and it pretty much involves all of our pieces up until this point. So, like I said, not all of us have reached this stage yet, but that's absolutely fine, because it gives you an idea as to what we're going on to do next. Oh, and how could I forget? It involves a little bit of painting as well. So here's a quick collage of all those different processes, some of the machines, the tools you've used, just as a little reminder as to how far you've come and what you've actually been up to. Feel free to take a minute to pause the video here and reflect and discuss what did you find really easy during this time, what have you really struggled with, and how did you overcome all of that? You really have done so much work year 8, and you should be incredibly proud of not just the skills that you've developed, but the work you've also completed. So well done. One of the learning paths for this project is all about knowledge and your ability to use key terms to explain a process of making. So like we said at the very beginning, a key term, that includes all of the tools, equipment, and materials that you've used and that you've listed previously in your starter. Your main task for the remainder of this lesson time is something that we will use, or I will use, next year for my next lot of year 8 students, because we're going to do this clock project again. And one of the hardest things for a teacher with this project is if I've had a student who's been absent, especially from a practical lesson, it can be really, really hard to catch them up and make sure they know what they're doing. So what I'd like you to do, using your subject knowledge and all those key terms that we've listed at the very beginning, I'd like you to complete the stages of make page in your booklet. So this involves using notes and sketches to explain how you have made specific parts of your clock. Now, even if you haven't finished the manufacturing process, there's at least 3 elements on there that you can complete. And the idea of this work year 8 is that they could be used for the students next year who miss out on a lesson and just need that extra bit of help and support. So you need to make sure that they are detailed, but most importantly, you need to make sure that they're accurate and the information you add is correct. So feel free to work with the people next to you, but you must all have a piece of work in front of you, because as I said previously, this is part of your learning path, which we will look at. Finally, this is just a little waggle. It's something that I've been working on in my spare time to help those students catch up. This is what my stage of make looks like. So this is stage 1, lamination, and I've split the stage of make up into 4 stages, despite it saying number 3 twice. I've listed the materials that I needed, and I've listed the equipment that I needed as well. Now, you don't have photos to use for yours. You will have to rely on sketches. But if you'd rather create something that's quite detailed, like this piece of work, you may work on A4 paper if you'd rather avoid using the booklet, as it has such a small amount of space. This is another example of a stage to make that I've written up myself. So this is stage 2, it's the measuring and the marking out. For some of us, this is the most boring part of the making process. It's a lot of numbers, it has to be really, really accurate. But for me, I do feel like it is the most important, And this is often the element that students who have been absent really struggle with, because they don't know what the measurements are, they don't know where the rulers are, and it's just really handy to have one of these handouts available for those students to look at. So if you're really not sure which stage of make to focus on, I would highly recommend focusing on the measuring and the marking out. And in the box at the front, underneath the whiteboard on the floor, there's a cream or whitish box. In there are some old samples or old waggles which demonstrate and have the measurements for this part of the making. So if you'd like to dig those out and use those as a reference and remeasure them to find out the measurements needed, you are more than welcome.